Okay, so we have a really fun episode for you today. Our podcast, we are going to be sitting down with Tony Suber and Brian Dorian of the SDG Impact Fund, and we are going to be taking a look at how instead of paying all your taxes, you can give that money to charity and do good with it by either investing in long-term assets or working with the guys at SDG Impact. I think this is a fantastic way to do good and give the government less money, which, if you know me, I'm a huge fan of. So let's dive into the podcast. Boom, we are live, ladies and gentlemen. I have two fantastic guests for you today in the area of social impact, doing good in the world, and paying a little less taxes. We've got Brian Dorian and Tony Suber of the SDG Impact. Gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Well, awesome. Great to have us.
So let's just kind of jump into it. This is a really exciting area and crossroads for me. I think business is one of the strongest forces for good in the world, and learning that all these new avenues of the social impact space, running into your guys' story. Tell us a little bit about what the SDG Impact Fund is and what you guys kind of do for work in a broad context.
Happy to apply on that, Tio. So thanks for having us. First off, the SDG Impact Fund is a donor-advised fund with a focus from a guidepost perspective on the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. So all that we do operationally and from a grant perspective, we guide ourselves by the 17 SDGs handed to us by the United Nations.
Brian, you want to take a run at it too?
So gladly, I'll jump on the tail end of that. It's I like what Tony said, is it's guideposts, right? So an athlete, former athlete in my life, you always got to look past your goal, right? So when you're visualizing a target, you need to look past it, because if you visualize your target, you're never going to hit it, right? So same thing with archery, you got to look through where you're trying to aim for. So I look at the SDGs, not necessarily, and maybe I'll get shunned for this, as a goal. They are goals unto themselves, but I'm looking at what's beyond that. So these are really the guideposts, and it's a way to kind of frame and say, look, if your project doesn't fit under one of the 17 SDGs, which is a pretty broad set of categories, you really got to reevaluate if your project is doing or making positive transformational social impact change in the world, right? Because they're pretty broad spectrums. So we kind of use that as a way to say, hey, as a donor advised fund, which I know we're going to dive into, we operate for donors, right, on their behalf, and the projects that we want to support need to fit under these 17 SDGs. So it allows us to cast a really broad net from an operational standpoint of what projects we can support and do good in the world.
Yes, so for those that don't know, the UN has put out a list of all these different things like clean water, high levels of education. You can find them by typing in the SDG goals, and they basically represent a rough sketch of how we might move into a more cultivated future for everyone at large by increasing the standards of living across the world. Access to information is on there too, I think, technology, services. So one of the fascinating things I found about the social impact space is just how broad spectrum it's become. Over the last few years, from cause marketing has been one of the areas that really fascinated me, to understanding the problems that exist in the nonprofit sector, how a lot of these companies that want to do good in the world are held back by the break in their business model, which is they're never profitable. They can't innovate. They can't take any risks to try to innovate, to solve problems, to become more profitable. They're put in a really difficult position. So my interest in the nonprofit sector and the for-profit sector kind of mingling together and creating these hybrid versions, seeing things like B corporations come to life. This is a really good way to increase not just personal, like, say it's an individual who wants to direct their wealth in a particular area or focus their wealth in a particular area, but for the corporation or for a business, it allows them to have a deeper core drive than just the product and service. There's rises of companies like Cotopaxi who took on REI and Patagonia and out of nowhere came sweeping along with a marketing campaign that had nothing to do with nature either. That it was just let's be in service of one another. And I think more and more investors, especially as the younger investors become the older investors, and we all change seats again, essentially, that more people are going to be interested in this. Let's not just meet the individual needs, but let's try to fulfill the many, so that we're all richer together. I think one of the promises of technology kind of offered us that deflationary relationship to everything should be kind of abundant and free for anyone to access if they want to. Now, the DAF represents a really good spot here too, because basically, and I'm a layman in these terms here, so this is why I want to have this caught. So a DAF is a donor advised fund. So correct me if I'm wrong here, but say I'm a corporation, and in my Tom's is another great example of a kind of a socially distinctive for good company, and I want to, instead of paying as much in taxes, I want to give to the donor advised fund. What does this story look like, and like how does it benefit a company, not just from internal morals, but on a financial structure, to be able to give to the DAF as in comparison with pay the taxes? And again, I'm not an American, so I don't know the tax law there well, but I know enough Americans who are going to love this stuff to want to share it.
That's fine. So I'll jump in, and I'll take this one. So a donor advised fund is basically a charitable giving account. So we've been granted powers by the IRS to operate as what they would call a supporting organization. So when a corporation, and it's not just corporations, right? It's corporations, it's individuals, it's trusts, individuals, all the way to trusts and everything in between, can create and operate a donor advised fund. So that's important to sort of clarify first. And in terms of giving to and through a donor advised fund, the advantage of leveraging a donor advised fund is twofold. So in a corporation perspective, a corporation does not have to then go out and form their own corporate 501c3. Through the donor advised fund, they already automatically are afforded those 501c3-like powers. So instead of XYZ Corporation going through the arduous process of figuring out a board, filing the paperwork to do so, and then creating a name, and then a separate governing board, they can simply create a donor advised fund on our platform and operate, in under 48 hours versus waiting a whole year before they get that feedback from the IRS. So that's one significant advantage in terms of not having to go through the process that is the IRS process. Some elect to do that, most do not. The other advantage in terms of a DAF that you'll find, and this is not particular to us, this is just the IRS code. So as a public charity, we are automatically in a separate donating category. So donations that come to us can be deducted in a standard scenario up to 60% adjusted gross income. However, with the CARES Act, that has gone up temporarily to 100%. So there's significant advantage to leveraging a DAF versus giving to, let's say, your local food pantry, which you can also do, but you get the immediate deduction when you give to the DAF, and then you can administer those future gifts to the food pantry or the homeless shelter or the local Boys and Girls Club as a follow-on gift. Any event that you say, well, I got to give away $1 million. I don't have a charity that I want to give $1 million to, nor do I want to go through the process of administering how I break up this $1 million. I want to take my time before I figure that out, whether it's a month or 2 years. I can put that gift into the DAF. I get an immediate tax deduction, and then I can take my time figuring out through the grant applications, who I want to then give the final gift to.
I'll jump in on the tail end of that. So a couple other elements too is, if you think about what Tony originally said, that this being like a charitable giving account, you can look at it like your typical financial vehicle inside of a charity, right? So funds that get donated in, say you're a corporation and you make a gift, as Tony said, of $1 million, the corporation gets that tax immediate, charitable benefit back. And then those assets, Tony said, can be distributed, requested to be distributed, granted out at any point, immediately or into the future. And they can also be asset managed and stewarded, right? So one of the defining things, and this is where I think we can bifurcate into a little bit of the difference with the SDG Impact Fund, is we're independent. So I think we're one of 4, Tony, at this point, independent DAFs, which means we are not affiliated with, associated with any singular financial entity. So most DAFs that exist on the market, a lot of them are beholden to a financial institution, right? So Fidelity or Schwab, et cetera. And so if you think about it from that lens, their DAFs, they're going to want to keep any assets that get donated into their silos. Meaning, hey, if I'm Fidelity, here's my portfolio of, money markets and et cetera, that you can take your donor funds and then, they'll grow and asset manage over time. And what is it doing? It's just generating fees for Fidelity, right? I mean, there's a growth on it, but it's generating a lot of capital for Fidelity, where we're independent. So meaning if you've got a money manager who's working at Fidelity or Schwab or et cetera, you are free as a corporation or individual to bring them on board and to steward, grow those assets as you see fit, or not, right? They could just get parked and sit there and then be deployed out. So the other element that just to bring into is the carry forward on a donation. So if it's not used, if your charitable receipt total deduction is not used in that first year, it carries forward for up to 5 years. So that's something else to think through. And then the other component too, I think Tony hit on, is just the ease of administration. So since we are the sponsoring organization, the SDG Impact Fund is the entity of record. All of the compliance, all of the recording, the ledgers, those paperworks that you would typically be doing with your own 501c3, that falls onto us, and that's us as administrators. It's kind of like your charity in a box on a back end. That's in essence what we sit and operate as, so that you as a corporation can really go focus on what you do well in your verticals rather than running a whole new business. So one little note there.
Yeah, no, this is a really cool niche. And this is what interested me about this idea, is that you guys are kind of like, I think as you pointed out here, the independent DAFs, you're leading away in a very niche potential of product. And that's what kind of interests me as well, is that from an adoption standpoint, I see that, with the evolution of companies like Tom's, and here's maybe a way to pose it as a question too, is do you think that companies like this are going to start to internally build their own forms of DAF? So do you think it would be wise, let's say I'm Tom's, right? And I know that here's the charities, maybe I even want to build my own version of one where we give money or shoes or something very specific. Can we go in as a corporation, or can we help formulate the conversations of how we build the charities inside of the DAF so that it's like basically a working part of the corporation itself?
Well, that's DAF 3.0, right? So that's the direction that we are heading. One of the things that we prefer to do with our DAF is we truly are donor centered. And what I mean by that is we do look at and listen to what our donors are trying to get accomplished. In a situation or an example like Tom's, think about it this way: Tom's could form, and others who have that sort of socially aware agenda in terms of their business model, they could form a sidecar DAF for their company, and then whether they donate product into their DAF, which can be done, or cash into their DAF, that can be done. But the fact that they could create an internal ecosystem for granting out, that's totally something that they sort of have their hands on, that is something that isn't really seen a lot of. So we're hoping that the future of corporate DAFs and what they can do with them bends towards what we're proposing to the market. It's a thing of beauty. More companies just have to look at it, get comfortable with it, and then start going in that direction.
Yeah, so right now, the SDG Impact Fund, what you guys are doing is kind of the intermediary of the, say, solely owned DAF of the corporation to, hey, we'll help you manage all the in and outs of maybe working with some of these other charitable organizations, ones that you guys have handpicked.
Right.
So this is the other part that excited me, is that I'm entirely interested in positions like this in companies, in foundations, and kind of the development of what this stuff looks like on the long term. It's one of the reasons why I thought these conversations would be so fun, is because it's such the more people that know about it, the better, because inevitably that's the result we're looking for. We're going off the basis here that if you were smart enough to be able to make X amount of dollars, you might be better off equipped to decide where it would go locally instead of just giving it to the government to make a mess of.
Well, let me insert this to you. You make a fantastic point. When individuals research or corporations begin researching what a donor advised fund is and what can be done with and through a DAF, the knee-jerk reaction is to go look at the 4 or 5 largest DAFs in the country. And what you'll find, and Brian has a great example of this, is that if you were looking at the entire IRS code, and that code equaled or was equal to, let's say, a hectare of land, most DAFs, 99.9% of them, only use up about 100 square feet of the opportunity that is a DAF, all the things that we could be doing and should be doing on behalf of our donor. So I would caution those who are researching, corporations especially, don't just look at those examples. Yes, they are good examples, but they are very limiting in what they'll allow their donor to do and get involved in. That's why the independent piece is really, really crucial.
So I guess there's kind of a 2-part segue there. So is one of the reasons why these older versions of DAF are not using as much of the capital is because they're locked up in, let's say, Annum spillover or something like this, where the majority of the capital sits in an asset, doesn't get distributed to an actual donor or doing anything because it's sitting in a more of an illiquid asset, and they're using the gains on that asset over time as what they distribute to charity. Is that correct?
Most DAFs have done a yeoman's job of marketing and communicating to the DAF donor base a behavior that makes little or no sense to us. And here's the behavior. You ought to manage your charitable DAF account the same way you manage your personal retirement account.
Yeah, well, there's this, again, the crossroads that I feel excited about is okay, so here, let me pause it in a question.
Sure.
So say I'm the CGO of a company. We open a DAF, where, it's managed either internally or externally with an independent group such as yourselves.
Sure.
And what we want to do is start where we just give people money. It's called like the Give People Money Foundation, where we go on to Instagram every day or Twitter or YouTube, and we just give people that can't afford groceries.
Let me stop you for
money.
a second. So technically, we can't give people money. We gotta give grants to organizations.
Oh, we can't just give people money? Oh,
no, we cannot.
I was kind of hoping you guys were going to say yes to that.
Good
okay,
try.
so we can just give people money, but we can't do it through. Okay, I guess that's more of you can't open a 501(c)(3) that just gives people money?
I'm not going to speak on behalf of a 501(c)(3) that does that. I'm going to say that a donor advised fund on our platform, we cannot do that.
Okay, but you guys you help manage the 501. So let's say there is already a 501(c) that their whole philanthropic thing is we just give money to people that need it.
Sure.
So you can as a DAF can communicate with this philanthropic entity, and we can make our corporate giveaways or like what we're giving to the DAF be focused on this. We help daily people through giveaway charity.
As long as we have a Yes, so as long as we have another 501c3 that's in place to do that, to take on that role, we can give to that organization, and then that organization can then give to individuals.
Okay,
But
so
we cannot give directly to individuals.
yeah,
And it happens all the time.
This might be a good segue to say there's three ways in which funds can be distributed or request to be distributed from a DAF, right? So the first is grants, and that's what we, in the 501c3 realm that you typically run into, like, hey, I'm going to make a grant to this organization or soup kitchen or whatever, right? So here you go. They're vetted 501c3, they're a charity, cool, here's the grant, goes out, boom, the request comes in. So that's the first. The second way, or I'll jump to the third and then I'll come back to the second because it kind of touches on what we were just talking about. So contracts and obligations, right? So if you think about if you were running your own 501c3, you'd have contractual obligations. Maybe you're hiring a bookkeeper or an attorney, or you're paying for, food or, an event or whatever else it is. Those are all invoiceable contractual obligations. Those can be paid directly by the DAF, right? So it's not a reimbursement to somebody who paid for it. It's just that invoice comes into the DAF, and then on behalf of the DAF, that request can go to pay for that invoice. So if you have an individual, contractor that's doing specific work for the DAF in certain ways, that invoice can get paid, right? So like in essence, they're being hired by the DAF to fulfill certain contractual obligations.
Fundraising is a good example.
Nice,
yeah, exactly. So then the third way, which is the one that gets really interesting that I think some people start to like geek out on, is investments. So a DAF can sit on the cap table of entities, for-profit and non-profit. So your DAF or a corporate DAF can actually obtain through purchasing up to 25% equity in an entity. And that can be a for-profit entity. So you can actually take for-profit stake, equity stake, sit on the cap table in for-profit entities from a DAF. Now, little asterisk, the DAF itself can own up to 99% equity. It's just the other 74% would have to be donated from that entity back into the DAF.
Okay, and so here, this is back more in the question of the DAF itself. So I know under for instance, this is for those that don't know, you have different types of regulations for the way hedge funds can communicate the work that they do and whether they're marketing themselves or not. Are there any marketing restrictions for the DAF? And as a side of that question, are there any, what are the relative separations or availabilities for connection between, say, the corporation and the DAF itself? Because I know we had talked about there being some gray area, mostly in communications. Okay, so yeah, two-part question. Can the DAF, I mean, are you guys allowed to market yourselves as in comparison with a more heavily regulated fund or a crowd fund regulation? And then can a corporation and a DAF have like an open, like a public relationship?
So I'll take the first half, the marketing question, and then Brian, if you could take the second half. So from a marketing perspective, to some degree, TO, we are self-regulating. So what the IRS would tell us is, we want to know what your bylaws are. We want to know what your statement of investment policy is. We want to know how you're going to regulate yourself, and then we're going to hold you accountable to what you say in those documents. So we're very careful not to limit some of the things that we know we want to do. So from a marketing perspective, it really comes down to disclosure. So we're very careful that we disclose, right? So, but in relationship to what you're asking specifically, we don't have the same sorts of marketing regulations around our work that, let's say, a financially regulated OCC, FINRA, SIPC, all those SEC, we don't fall under their governance. We fall under the governance of the IRS. So our marketing is pretty widespread. One thing that we do make very, very clear is that all gifts are irrevocable. That's a marketing thing that we must disclose. And we do not give tax advice. So we're very, very careful about both of those.
Yeah. This is not financial advice and no refunds.
Yeah.
You said it. I didn't say that.
So, and in that, I think the difference is, I mean, where we and all sub-DAFs or component funds of the SDG Impact Fund are operating as if, and they are a 501c3, right? So in that, in essence, you know, it's very different because it's like, oh, this is the fund is, I don't want to say it's a terrible name for what this is, because when you hear fund, you immediately think like Wall Street financial terms, but this is financial just inside of a charity wrapper. So the marketing element is, in essence, you need to be marketing, right? You're in essence, I always say, soliciting for donations. You're fundraising. So in that way, it behooves if that's the modus operandi of that specific, you know, let's say project fund or initiative, to go out and say, hey, we're raising funds here, donate here, right? And why? Because here's your charitable receipt, and then here's what it's going to, and you can publicly disclose that however you want. So those restrictions don't apply from the, like, you're not allowed to solicit, you're not allowed to market for investments into this thing. In fact, it's the opposite. It's like, it's in essence like Red Cross saying, here, donate, right? That's basically it. So as far as the separation from corporate and, you know, that side, it needs to be firewalled. So from the standpoint of your corporation exists as a corporation, the DAF is a complete separate, you know, vehicle and entity unto itself, but absolutely they can work hand in hand, right? So it can say, hey, we're corporation, you know, XYZ, and this is what we're doing. Oh, and then here is our call it whatever name it is, XYZ Foundation or XYZ Institute or XYZ Impact Initiative. You can have those types of handshakes all day long. From an operational standpoint, though, it needs to be clearly defined that, oh, I'm talking to the corporation, or, oh, I'm talking to, you know, the DAF itself, which is no different than if you had you know, your own as a 501c3. So
right, and as a side question, are there this is a kind of, we're getting a very obscure sideway here point, but is there any conflicts of interest of, say, someone sitting as a member of the board on a foundation, also sitting on as a member of the board of that corporation that's funding the DAF? Are there conflicts of interest in owner or board seatings or anything like this? As I don't, no one, there's very few people that care about that. But
No, so you just described in my head what sounds like three different entities: a corporate board, a corporate foundation board, and then the DAF. So in your example, no, there's no conflict there.
Okay.
If they were sitting on our board and on the board of the corporation, and the corporation is donating into the DAF, then there may be some areas where if the DAF is doing service work with the corporation, he or she may have to recuse themselves, but not from a grant perspective.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I get all my money out of this consult here. No, thank you guys. I love it.
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
Humanitarian, Tio. Humanitarian.
Yeah, well, this is the thing, right? You know, business is a really powerful force for good, and
Sure.
this leads me to my last question. Is you know, a lot of this is based off the incentive model. You know, it's a great quote: "Is show me the incentive, and I'll show you the outcome." Now tell me, how do I work? Like, let's imagine I want to work with you guys, or I want to start my own DAF and try to bring on clients to manage their money. Can you look like you're both happy and comfortable? So it's a two-part question. A, how did you kind of get into this sector? And B, are the incentives high enough for someone who wants to, say, just start an independent DAF focused on these niche areas for you guys as individuals to manage this work?
Sure. So I'll begin. My time with Donor Advised Funds started back in 2006. I was a regional director of development at University of Notre Dame. And while there, just a year after being there, we ventured into the Donor Advised Fund space. We partnered with the likes of Stanford, WashU, Pomona, Princeton, Harvard, and some others. And together, if you look back in 2007, 2008, we all launched our university models or versions of a donor advised fund. But I kept coming back to the fact that once I looked at the detail, gosh, I don't know that we as a university even do it right. I don't know that the Wall Street DAFs do it right. And I don't know that the community foundations do it right relative to being donor-centered and taking advantage of all that the IRS says that is allowable and within compliance. So that was the start, and then I've been in DAFs and in the DAF world from an administrator perspective and a fundraising perspective ever since.
Yeah, I want you to go in too, Brian, but I wanted to point out that, you know, for me, I watched a video, who was the speaker? It was called Why We Think About Charity is Dead Wrong. I forget his name. Great speaker in the fundraising arena. And he was just talking about the difficulties of the nonprofit sector. Mm. And, you know, coming from the for-profit sector, seeing how easy it is relatively to start a company that makes $100 million versus a charity that can average $20 million. It's unparalleled. It seems like a much smarter idea to try to start a $100 million company that gives away $20 million a year to actually achieve your philanthropic goals, because we know the incentive model works well. So, you know, my interest into this space for you guys as well is, the more ways we can create incentive models to help the nonprofit sector, because people are going to consistently go into that work. I understand why they would. I hope that over the years here we can change them into much more hybrid models where we have this internal relationship between the company's focus and core mission to do good in the world, you know, and now we have a product because that's how we accomplish doing this good in the world. I hope that becomes the normal. But, you know, in these segue moments, you know, part of it is, well, damn, you know, you guys went out and you were able to, this is such a cool company in my mindset. Like, these stories of like compassionate capitalism doing well are exciting to me, because I'm assuming you guys make money from helping these charitable contributions and helping these donors find places to put their capital. So it was just such an all-around exciting story for me. I think it has so many great parts. Brian, I'd love for you to jump in. How did you get started in this space? And
that's a long story that we don't have time for. Like, it's lifetimes, right? So
we'll have you back again in the future.
I know. So one quick note that I wanted to glean out of that is you're hitting on, there's, you know, we get programmed into seeing things a certain way, right? Whether it's culturally, et cetera. Just because you are a charity or a nonprofit does not mean that you just throw all business out the window, right? It doesn't mean you just, and in fact, I think that's what kind of sometimes happens along the way, is it becomes, oh, we're now a nonprofit, so our business model is just taking in money and then flowing it out, right? And there's an element to that, but I think the beautiful thing that's happening, at least potentially in our generation and now, is you have people that are super savvy from a business, investing, financial term, and go, you know what? Just because I can do this, I don't want to use those skill sets anymore just to make more money for some, you know, financial institution. How do I take that and put that inside of, well, a nonprofit, et cetera? The DAF is that sort of universal conscious coupler, I think, that allows that to happen really, really well. So that's a way to say, that's how I kind of ended up in this sector. So first quarter century of my life was really academia focused. I had told myself I was going to be the CEO of a pharma company by the time I was 35. So I linearized my life on this path. Had 2011, 2012, just complete life explosion, you know, decisions that I made, dark night of the soul. You know, that's a conversation for other times, but was left going, okay, who am I? Why am I here? What am I doing and for what purposes? And then I started listening to my gut. I really started listening to that still small voice, launched a company that was designed trying to be of use to the world and tutoring people in a specific small niche. Didn't know anything about launching a company, just sort of dove into that. And I got bit by that bug of kind of doing things for myself, listening to myself, and being of use in the world. And that kind of guidepost and going, oh my goodness, is what has led me all the way through. At that point, I got into cryptocurrency, blockchain, 2011, 2012. So I was like, oh my goodness, what is this place that I don't understand the tech of it, but there's something here energetically. And I dove straight into that in community building and working behind the scenes with a bunch of projects. And it was relational, right? So a lot of my work becomes relational of, the collaboration at speed of trust is really, really key. And through those relationships ended up meeting the SDG Impact Fund, right? Basically as it was kicking off. So met two of the board members and then got introduced to Tony. I knew nothing about DAFs. And this was 2 years ago. Literally was, going, this thing sounds incredible, but I don't even know comprehensively what this is. I just know there's something to this. And so it just began digging and enjoying reading IRS tax code, which I never thought I'd say that in my life. But going, wait, you can actually do this? It's possible and legal and compliant to do this? And that's when, as those aha moments, as Tony says, just kept clicking, I went, okay, this vehicle is the sort of central conduit whereby I can bring all of these projects and people and relationships, almost like an incubator model, through this to do massive good. So
fantastic. This is this is what excited me about that story too, is that from a sales or a product standpoint, this stuff seems like such an easy sell, where I don't see why you couldn't walk up into a corporation like, hey, I've got this, you're gonna like this. Most people, I think if you go in there, so it just seems like something I hope we see more of, is this mix of business incorporating their mission, and these are great ways for them to accomplish it. There's benefits in paying less taxes. They can incorporate it into all of their documents, all of their marketing, all of their team building exercises. It's just it's a knockout of the park win for any company that realizes it's going to have to progress to please the younger generations. So it was great to have you guys on today. Remember, everyone, you can find them at sdgimpactfund.org. None of this is financial advice. Ask your tax accountant if you have any questions about these types of things. Give us a thumbs up if you like this content. If you're new to the Arcane Bear, welcome to the rabbit hole. It's always a great time. We never were going to end up here. Tony, Brian, it's been such a fantastic time. Hopefully we'll have you guys back on in the future. If anyone wants to reach out to them, I definitely suggest it. Helping set up their own DAF. I think you guys had an onboard placement on that you could see publicly. It says a minimum of 25,000. So we could assume that's someone that probably makes over 180,000 to 200,000 in the States. So what our taxes are at? What's your guys' tax?
Everyone's got their own calculus, Tio. Don't worry about it.
won't even try to wager.
They know
a guess.
who they are. Don't worry about it.
I won't even wager a guess. But it sounds like a pretty easy early entry to try something out. And I think one of the things I really liked what you guys said too is just it's totally de-risked capital, and you can go in and you can invest it in a physical company. And have the turnover go into, you don't have to actually just give it directly to the charity right away. You could put it into Bitcoin, and all the earnings extra go into something else. It's a fantastic way to be really creative with money that you were just going to give Uncle Sam anyways.
Correct. Great way to look at it.
Beautiful, gentlemen. Thank you very much. I'll keep you on for a few minutes afterwards. This is Tio with the Arcane Bear. We're signing off for the rest of the day. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Tio.